Councilor Casar?
Put my glasses on.
Thank you. Well, good morning, y'all. I've just handed out a copy of a resolution that we're putting on for the February 21st agenda. I wanted to start out just by saying how proud I've been to be a part of a council and a community that's really unanimously supported affordable housing in so many different ways, between passing the housing bonds, the Homestead Preservation District, funding the Housing Trust Fund at unprecedented levels, all the 9% and 4% tax credit deals we've supported, and how many we have on our agenda this coming week. Finally, moving forward on city land, I think we really are a part of a council and a community that's really prioritized that issue. At the same time, we are facing things like revenue caps, the Trump tax bill or law, which I like to call the Trump tax scam. Really, both of those two things are really putting a strain on our national and city ability to fund affordable housing, even though we're trying to do as much of it that we can. And so the presentation I'm going to give here today on an initiative we've been working on for a while with our co-sponsors and folks in the affordable housing community is to really make sure that the dollars that we've worked so hard to dedicate can go as far as possible to provide as much affordable housing as possible, because we all know how dire the need is. And so we really want to do the most we can with the limited dollars and the limited land we have to help families that are really struggling to afford a cost of living in the city. And so I'll put the presentation on and walk you guys through it. So we're calling the initiative Affordability Unlocked. I'd really like to thank my co-sponsors, Councilmember Harper Madison, the Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Renteria, as we've been working on this together, but obviously within our quorum rules, I wanted to make sure that we had as much time between here and a resolution passing, and then obviously, since there would be necessary changes to the code to address some of these issues, it would go through Planning Commission and come back to us. So I'm making this brief presentation and handing this out today so that we have time to take any questions or discussion that we have time for today, that again on February the 19th at a work session, and then putting on the agenda for the 21st for a vote on a resolution, which would then, of course, if passed on that day, go through Planning Commission and then come back to us. But the real goal of this is for the affordable housing that we already plan on funding and supporting, making sure that we support those developments as much as possible to get as much affordable housing from those developments as we can. So in order to stretch those dollars, there are city requirements that this proposal asks to ease, but only really for those affordable housing developments that are meeting a very high bar and are doing at least 50% affordable housing, essentially those that qualify for our subsidy. We know that in areas experiencing gentrification, we want to get as many units on the ground as possible to be able to turn the tide on gentrification. And then considering our segregation problem, we also know that sometimes city restrictions are what limit our ability to build more units in areas where there usually aren't enough affordable units. This project stands apart and alone from any future sort of code rewrite, because what I'm going to propose here was never contemplated in Code Next, and in conversations with the manager is something that was never really contemplated to be done for a comprehensive rewrite. Really what we're talking about is, as we go and spend these affordable housing bond dollars, as we go and implement the HPD at levels we never have and a housing trust fund at levels we never have, to get as many units out of those funding streams as possible. So we looked at some case studies because of lots of cases that we've worked on in the past, and have found that sometimes our own restrictions are reducing the number of affordable units we'd get by 20%, 50%, 100%. A great case study is one that's happening right now, a project under construction called Aria Grande. We all supported it as the last council with $1.5 million of our bonds. It also got the 9% housing tax credit, which are the biggest subsidies you can get from the state and federal government as a great project. It's in Travis Heights, so a higher opportunity area, a project we, I think, supported unanimously. And it's getting 60 units that are affordable to low-income and very low-income people, which is great. But in conversations with the folks executing that project, we could have gotten 30 more affordable units if they didn't have to overbuild their parking, and if they could have just built under their height in their base zoning as opposed to the height that was reduced because of compatibility. There is no way that the council could have voted at the time to waive those two things. If the council could have done that, I think we would have advocated for them to do so, but there is no way for us to just vote on that project to have released them from compatibility and parking. So with 30 more affordable units, we could have gotten a 50% increase in the amount of affordable housing in that key location. And it would have required very little additional subsidy, so we would have been able to stretch our limited dollars much further. There are examples, though, that aren't counterfactuals like that one. Here, Guadalupe Neighborhood Development Corporation, because they are in an NCCD, where their headquarters is just east of 35, adjacent to downtown, that NCCD actually largely basically waives compatibility for the site where their office is and they have affordable housing at. And so there we actually have seen how they were able to build 22 affordable units at this site. It's another project that we supported. And because compatibility was largely waived for them, there are 6 more affordable units, which is 38% more than if they had to comply with code on compatibility. So we can actually see how if we were to provide some waivers to folks that are, more waivers to folks that are providing truly affordable housing, that we could be getting a lot more affordable housing on the ground as we can actually go and drive and see today. And then the last one I want to show is, apart from just an incremental increase in affordable housing, we as a council, I think last year, it might have been 2 years ago, but I think it was last year, provided waivers to parking, compatibility, setbacks, and height to Habitat for Humanity at their 4th and Onion site to provide 56 low-income home ownership units at really low levels, I mean, really low price for those 56 affordable units, which they never would have built at all if it weren't for these waivers. And so in this case, we actually unlocked the entire lot to be able to provide affordable housing. So in this case, it wasn't just an incremental increase. I mean, it actually got us those 56 because they wouldn't have been able to do this project otherwise. So in thinking about this, instead of trying to go case by case and or little area by area, we tried to put together a citywide program that would really get us more affordable housing across the city with our limited dollars and limited land without increasing impervious cover anywhere in the city. So we wanted to set a high bar for participation, and we've set that bar essentially at the requirements for getting housing subsidy. That is 60% MFI or below for rental, 80% MFI or below for home ownership, and the requirements for those tax credits is 50% affordable housing. Those levels of affordability at 50% affordable housing is not something that traditional market rate developers go and do. Really, that is the bar that we tend to set for people that are truly doing affordable housing. On top of the traditional requirements we have already for affordable housing, I know that, and we know the council has really had an emphasis on trying to get multi-bedroom units along with permanent supportive housing and senior housing. And so even though it's not a requirement technically for 4% and 9% tax credits, the resolution that as proposed and handed out does require for some number of units to be multi-bedroom and or PSH or senior housing. So again, in that case, we really wanted to line it up to the existing requirements, but because that's such a council priority and because affordable housing developers tend to be able to do this, we did include that additional protection along with the tenants' rights protections that are already existent in our program. And then in order to achieve that higher level of units, and of course this is the starting proposal, but this is why we have several weeks to talk about this, not just at council, but at planning commission, and then a significant amount of time looking at actual ordinance changes before they come back to council. But the current proposal is to have the zoning govern the height rather than compatibility, so that so compatibility being waived, parking not being having specific requirements also being waived. We know that affordable housing builders are still going to build parking for their residents as needed, but we don't want to mandate an overbuild of parking because then essentially our affordable housing subsidy is going to building parking spaces. A waiver of floor to area ratio, which means they will still have to build on their existing footprint, but not limiting floor space. Because if we limit floor space on affordable housing development, then we're limiting number of affordable bedrooms. Not applying the residential design standards and super duplex rules that were really designed for market rate development, but for affordable housing development don't seem to make lots of sense. This means that if somebody wants to build a duplex where both of the units are affordable, they wouldn't have to share a common wall or have the little connecting trellis that you see on duplexes. And the residential design standards are really meant to limit the size and number of bedrooms in something that makes sense to me for market rate development. But when we're reducing the amount of floor space in affordable housing, then we're technically reducing the amount of affordable housing. Removing some of the administrative barriers, like site plan for 12 or fewer units. Of course, when you get to a bigger development, it just makes sense to have site plan. An additional boost of height by 25%, reduction of front and rear setbacks. That doesn't mean that there would be more pavement. It just means that if an affordable development needs to be reconfigured on a lot a little further forward or a little further back, giving that flexibility. An increase in the amount of units that can be built, again, with a 50% minimum for affordable housing. So, of course, the more units that are built, the more affordable housing that is built. Setting a floor at 6 units and a ceiling at increasing density by 50% in zones that allow more. I've included a little photograph here of a fourplex that I walk by pretty regularly when I go on a long walk. This fourplex used to be allowed to be built. It essentially has 3 units in the front, 1 unit in the back, and you can see how in a single-family lot that fourplex fits nicely. There can be a discussion over the course of the year or whatever on where this sort of development should be allowed to be built by right. But at a minimum, I haven't heard very many objections that if this were included 2 affordable low-income units that were low rent and required to be set aside for low-income people, to me, that is a no-brainer that I've regularly heard from the community that it would be for. So always allowing a minimum of 6 and then increasing density up to 50%. Of course, with existing lot constraints and trees and all of that stuff, we know we're not going to be getting all the units that we need, but at least unlocking the ability of our existing land to do it. And if we're going to allow a fourplex like this, then we would need our occupancy limits to mirror the ability for more families to live on a lot. And then finally, allowing construction of affordable housing in commercial zones, because we know with our existing bond dollars, our nonprofit partners and for-profit partners are looking for every piece of land that will work, and allowing them to turn a strip mall into an affordable housing development just makes sense. Of course, exempting, not including things like industrial zones or places where we wouldn't want residential housing because of an existing health hazard. So all of this is possible. I think on certain lots, like the lot that we were discussing in Clarksville recently, that I think it was Councilmember Flanagan that pulled that. You know, right now we might be limited to 1 or 2 affordable housing units there. This could get us 3 or 4 if the lot works. And then for some of our larger multifamily, this could be getting us dozens more affordable housing units without any increased cost, all without adding any additional pavement. So we would get more affordable housing without any more pavement in the city. We've been working with the affordable housing community on doing our best to put together something that really works for everyone. Again, this isn't about getting people that don't build affordable housing to suddenly start doing so. The program requirements are so high that really this is when somebody's building affordable housing and meeting our affordable housing goals for a comprehensive plan that we want to unlock that affordability. So the Housing Coalition, Housing Works, some of our neighborhood and community development corporations, and Austin Habitat and Foundation communities have been working on putting this together. Of course, not all questions are answered. Of course, I'm trying to put this out here in front of everybody so we can get questions, make modifications, have Planning Commission look at it. But I just see this as a really critical step for getting as much affordable housing as we can and making sure we're not getting in our own way towards achieving these goals for our community. So thank you all for letting me walk everybody through that, and happy to discuss now, and then also we'll have a work session again in 2 weeks.
Just quickly, when will this be on the, what meeting will this be on?
February 21st, so that's our next council meeting in 2.5 weeks.
Okay. Councilmember Flanagan?
Thanks for laying this out. I had kind of heard through the grapevine this was being contemplated, and originally I was kind of concerned about entertaining code amendments in advance of the rewrite, but seeing that what you've laid out is really related to projects receiving public dollars, I'm very supportive of this idea. I know you only have 4 co-sponsors. If you're interested in a 5th, I'd be happy to sign on as a 5th co-sponsor.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Madison?
Yes, ma'am, if I may. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate you guys' effort here and super proud to be a part of it. Something I'd just like to point out is it's on all of our minds that the city of Austin is immensely prosperous, right? And we all have to acknowledge the lack of equitable distribution of affordability. And I really feel very proud to be a part of an initiative like this where, you know, what our voters, you know, elected us to do was essentially come up with bold, innovative ideas that will help to distribute some of that prosperity and help to protect and advocate for the members of our community who are experiencing displacement and a substantial lack of affordability. So I'm really excited to see this, you know, go forward and us to create some change that exists in perpetuity as it pertains to affordable housing. Thank you.
Councilmember Kitchen?
I applaud this effort. I think it's a great idea to bring forward. I do have a lot of questions about it, and so I'm trying to figure out what the best way is to ask those questions. Should we be doing message board things? I can run through them now, but that would take a lot of time. And what would y'all prefer?
I think in the interest of time, message board would be a good.
Okay. Okay. Well, then I'll put the series of questions up on the message board. I'll give you an idea of what they are. I'm going to want to understand. Well, first off, like I said before, I think this is a really good idea. So I'm wanting to ask about the details. So I'm going to want to know how it relates to the blueprint and specifically the implement. In fact, I would. Are you thinking of bringing this to the housing committee or no? Because that would be a place we could talk about it. If you've got room on the agenda.
Yeah, we just have, like I mentioned in the last work session, such a massive presentation happening this month that I think that it just wouldn't fit within the existing agenda.
Well, that's fine. I would like to understand how it relates to the blueprint. I'd like to understand how it relates to the goals that are in the blueprint. So, for example, and maybe it's in here, and I'm just looking quickly. How does it relate to some of the things that we've talked about in the blueprint is opportunity geographically throughout the city. So I'd like to understand how it relates to that. I'd like to understand how it relates to permanent supportive housing, services for seniors, the kinds of design standards we have in place for seniors in the ADA. Let's see. And those are my, I know I'll have more questions. As I read it, it's not, it talks in turn. I'll just ask one immediate question if that's okay. So I see it as being designed to be something that helps us utilize our housing bonds, but I don't see it as a precursor or requirement for the housing bonds. Is that correct? Am I looking at that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think our housing bonds would start getting utilized and implemented before this goes into effect.
Okay.
And there might be projects that have less units.
That
on
wouldn't
them
be part of this.
because
That
that.
wouldn't be part. Okay. All right. Then the last question is, so there's a, well, actually, I'll just save that one for the message board. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll get working on this.
Councilmember Poole?
Yeah, I think this looks pretty good, and I want to express my support. I'd like to learn more, maybe look at some of the details, maybe see some modeling, the points that Ann brought up with regard to how it aligns with our strategic blueprint would be good. I also was curious about the baseline on the current. Are we going to use the baseline on current code? City manager, will you be bringing back something that uses bits and pieces of the land development code rewrite that we worked on last year, or do you know?
So as I talked about late last year, I'll be bringing forward a process for your consideration in a handful of weeks, and so later this month or early in March.
Great. The pieces that you're highlighting track with the concerns that I've had in the past. More ability to have more than one bedroom or a studio, the family-friendly piece, ensuring we have housing all around the city for folks who maybe need permanent supportive housing, anyway, I think this looks really good. I definitely support the requiring developers to provide affordable housing. When the city gives development bonuses, I felt like they should do more all along. And I also was hoping we could find a way to have the percentage of income be lower. And I'm glad to see that you're also working on that and having a larger percentage of the units be offered for affordable housing. That definitely ticks boxes that I've been concerned about for about 4 years. We need to use our leverage for community benefit and not just give it away. And I think we all feel that same way. We have an opportunity here to get more community benefits that more directly align with what the community needs without giving it away. So I haven't thought through yet what all the specifics would look like, of course, but I'd say on the whole, the package is worthy of consideration, and I look forward to working with everybody on this. Thanks for bringing this.
Councilmember Alter?
Thank you. So I really like how this resolution focuses us on our low and moderate income housing goals, which the market is not on its own going to provide. We did pass a $250 million bond because the market is not going to provide that. And I appreciate that the direction of this is to facilitate leveraging those bonds to accomplish as much as we can in terms of delivering the affordable housing and also making it easier for our affordable housing providers to accomplish what they need to accomplish. I think this is very much in line with discussions we've been having over the last year or two in the Housing Committee about, what do we have at our disposal that will allow us to make things easier for the affordable housing developers to develop their units. I think it's important that we use our entitlements wisely, and so I think this is an important shift to get the supply that we want. The market is supplying the market numbers right now. What they're not doing is supplying the low and the moderate income, and so I think using our tools for that is important. I have not had a chance to review this in depth, and I'm sure that I will have several questions. Like Councilmember Poole, I would like to see some modeling. I don't know that has to be in there for when it passes the resolution, but when it comes back, I think we need to see some modeling because it might help us further refine it to have the benefit of that tool. One of the things that I will raise now in terms of questions is how this interplays with mixed-use developments. So we're talking about doing this in areas that were commercial, and I think we did have a lot of agreement through our discussions that we should be allowing residential and commercial, not industrial areas. But what does this mean if somebody is doing a mixed-use development that's 80% hotel, office, and 20% residential? And we have examples of that where we're looking through that. And I'm not sure that whether you've thought about that. I'd like to hear a little bit about that. And I think that the mayor also had brought a proposal, a resolution that we passed related to affordable housing bonuses that I'd like to understand how this interacts with that. I think I was a co-sponsor on that, and I'd like to understand how these two interact.
No, and Councilmember Alter, I think the commercial question is one that is still unresolved in this resolution. I think that we certainly would want to allow affordable housing developers to do the bottom floor commercial as we see in VMU. The question, I think the pending question that I'm happy to resolve at council or have the planning commission figure out is if there is a second floor of commercial or office, does it apply? Would you be allowed to do this or not? I think it's obvious that if somebody's doing 80% non-residential, that they shouldn't be allowed to participate in this. But it seems obvious to me that if it's just the first floor that they should, and so figuring out what the line is definitely an important question for us to get answered. And as far as the mayor's resolution, which I forget who the co-sponsors were, but I appreciate all of them. The way this is different is that this isn't calibrated in the way that resolution hopes to calibrate things. The calibration being you want private developers who aren't traditionally doing affordable housing to try to hop into the program. In this case, this isn't about setting the program requirements to tempt someone in. This is really about those folks who are meeting our affordable housing requirements, getting the bonus. And so that's how I separate them in my mind. And I do appreciate folks already sort of having comments and questions on this, because I only posted on the message board yesterday, and do recognize that if you have new questions after having more time with this, because you haven't had time, that is great, and great to put on the message board. I just wanted to get this in front of people as quickly as possible, but do appreciate the questions already.
Councilor Ellis?
I'm really glad to see this resolution, and I'm excited about big ideas like this. I would like to speak to the responsiveness that our transit planning is going to need to have, depending on what the echo effects are of ideas like this. I know that we have our strategic mobility plan that is currently pretty well drafted, but there's still room for adjustment, and Project Connect. I know that the mobility bonds have largely already undergone preliminary engineering, but I think we have some opportunity to make sure that those transit plans are reflecting what might be happening down the road, because this is a great opportunity to build that into this plan.
Councilor Rotovo?
Thank you, Councilmember, for bringing this forward. And as others have said, I think it's a long felt community imperative that we make sure that as projects are coming forward and asking for increased entitlements, that there be substantial community benefits. I think as early as I got involved in city issues, people were making that claim and advocating for it. And I think this is a good proposal to begin that conversation, or to advance that conversation. A couple questions that I hope you can help answer, maybe not today, but in the next session or between now and then. I am interested in knowing a little bit more about why the percentage is set at 50% market. As I read this, it's about 50% market, 50% affordable. Why is the percentage crafted in such a way and not weighted toward affordable housing? I am very glad to see, I'm not entirely sure I understand some provisions, but those are kind of micro level. But I'm very glad to see the provision in there about existing residential development. I think it's extremely important that we're not incentivizing the redevelopment of units that may be providing 100% affordable housing now and shifting those to a different equation. So some of the questions I would have around that is, number one, the reason you've provided an exclusion, or you've crafted the language in such a way that existing residential development would be entitled in this way if the reason is to replace aging or dilapidated residential facilities. And I'm interested in knowing more about who would make that determination. I mean, we want to be sure that that's something that can be substantiated by someone other than the person who wants to redevelop the property. And then number two, in that same section on page 5 of 7, the property owner agrees to replace the affordable units one for one. And is your intention that those are subsidized units as well as market affordable units? Because as you know, so much of our multifamily stock is affordable but not subsidized, and I'd want to be sure that we're making sure that, again, we're not redeveloping those units that are currently affordable in the market. Do you have a quick answer to that one?
Yeah, so on the exclusion is really meant to apply to things like HACA's redevelopments, for example, of Chalmers or Rosewood, where we are actually always, whether it's market rate affordable multifamily or income restricted affordable multifamily, that when those units are taken down, they are replaced, and we've tried to write it out that they are replaced one for one and set at rent so that current tenants are able to return, and granting those tenants a right to return to that development. So really, my hope is that exception is used very infrequently, but at the same time, we don't want someone like the Housing Authority that is, complying with the Uniform Relocation Act and bringing people back into brand new units to be excluded. So really, that's the window that we are trying to create. And I'm open, once they're going through the code writing process, to figure out whether that's something that has to be substantiated by the manager or a department director or council or what have you. But the hope is to provide a narrow exception, really, for people like the Housing Authority that do that kind of work.
So do you see so then maybe I misread it. It is not intended to discourage.
It's intended to discourage use of this bonus if you're taking down existing affordable housing. Largely discourage that,
But by
except to
affordable
allow.
housing in that context, are you talking about just subsidized affordable
All-
housing?
Anything that is that is affordable to people at low income rent. So it's meant to discourage redevelopment of income restricted and non-income restricted low income housing, and then provide the opportunity for someone like HACA to do the kinds of projects that we're supporting them doing.
I would ask that be made clear in this, that it applies not just to HACA and Section 8 and others, but those that are affordable, are naturally occurring affordable
That's the
housing
intention, and
right
we'll
now.
do our best to make that as even more clear.
And I'm happy to bring forward an amendment if that's the intent. But thank you for explaining that clarification. And I think that's all.
Oh, and you did
just
have
one-
the question about 50%. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's to align with the requirements for 4% tax credits, which are currently set
Okay.
at 50% affordable housing, and then an average of 60% MFI within that affordability period. That's so when we grant these 4% tax credits, they're always majority affordable, and if there's any 70% MFI units, then another unit has to be 50% MFI. Those are the program requirements as most recently set.
50% our market rate?
50% is the
4%?
maximum that can be market rate. Now, of course, we're
So
approving
then
many
my
of them.
question is the same, I think. Why is 50% market? I mean, if we're doing this, do we want to adjust that and have the majority be affordable rather than use the lowest percent? I mean, it sounds like we would be setting this then at the lowest standard for 4% rather than bumping up that requirement. And so that's something I'm going to give a bit of thought to, but I didn't know if you had conversations with people that were informing that 50% split, or if there are opportunities to increase that beyond 50%, which I would support. And just on my last comment, I would just suggest, so Aria Grande is in District 9, and I'm familiar with, I'm familiar with that project. And one of the things that I want to just call your attention to, I'm going to go back and look at the details of the points you've raised on page 3 of 7, but it's my understanding they went through the grandfathering, the Chapter 245 process, and were grandfathered back to 1971 regulations, at which point we did not have compatibility. So I'm striving to mesh what I know about that project and the grandfathering vested rights they received, and the claims here about the number of units they could have achieved because they were using it's my understanding they were allowed to develop under much older regulations. So anyway, thank you.
Councilmember Renteria?
Yes, and one of the prime examples also is Rebecca Bing. We're going through a major redevelopment of that building there that's 16 stories high. It's housing for low-income seniors and people with disability, but it does have a few market rate housing. And because of the structure that's very sound, they were decided that they were just going to build an apartment complex right next door to it and move all the residents back into the apartment and redevelop and rebuild the existing building there and allow people to return back. And one of the big questions was always that, do they have the right to return? And it's a big concern to seniors and low-income people, or they will be able to return if they want to. And I think by adding this on as the right to return, guarantee these low-income and senior people the right to return to their buildings. And it just takes all the questions out. So I'm really glad that my colleague was able to put that in there into this amendment, because I think it's really going to go a long way to reassure our people that are being relocated and that they do have a right to return.
Councilmember Flanagan?
Thank you. I know we're all trying to be very careful not to make this about code rewrite writ large, and I appreciate that. But I do want to just say, from my perspective, I consider the building of additional housing itself to be a community benefit, especially if that housing is getting built along transit, if it's being built where there's existing facilities where I don't have to build another fire station or build another park or build another whatever. It actually generates more tax revenues for the existing facilities. It doesn't, when you add new buildings, it doesn't come under any tax caps. That's new revenue you get to spend, and if you don't have additional expenses that come with it, then that becomes a community benefit itself. And, just acknowledging that what the market provides now is what we allow the market to provide, not necessarily what it would provide without restriction or with a different set of restrictions. And in a very real sense, many of us have parts of our districts that are sprawled. Certainly almost all of my district, might be able to consider it that way. Building more housing in this way is also a good way to achieve some of our environmental benefits, walkable neighborhoods, less long-distance commuters, that kind of thing. And Councilmember Ellis, I'm glad that you brought up the ASMP. I've been thinking about that same thing too, not necessarily in relation to this resolution, but that perhaps what we get to on the ASMP over the short term, the next couple of months as it comes back to us, is somewhat of a current conditions plan, but then we can come back and do an amendment as it relates to the bigger questions we'll hopefully be addressing by the end of the year.
All right, well, I'm obviously supportive as a co-sponsor. Thanks for asking me to be part of this. I think it's a great, bold initiative, and I look forward to the continued discussion as it comes up on the agenda. So we're going to go ahead and move. Did you have? Oh,
Just one last thing. Because Councilmember Renteria brought up the right to return piece, I just want to remind the city manager that this council did pass a policy asking the staff to create a right to return policy in all of the places where we have leverage to do so. And so I think there's still high enthusiasm about that. It's my understanding from the memo that we're going to be updated in February on that. But as the lead sponsor on that, I really very much want to see that program in place. And I think it's a huge community interest. So I hope we will march forward, not just in thinking about it in terms of programs such as the one that we've discussed today with regard to our density bonus, but in all of the places where we have leverage to have that right to return embedded.